Welcome back to Coffee with Krav. Welcome those loyal people that have been watching every week, and we have some new people that have joined us, so welcome there as well. What we're trying to do on a weekly basis is bring information, education, some entertainment on a weekly basis, because most of us are remotely in our house, and we were looking for some other things to understand, and also we're looking for some connection. And today we're going to be educated about education. With this pandemic happening, there's a lot of questions on a lot of people's minds. I've been talking to a lot of people. They're talking about their grandchildren, about their children, what's going to happen with this pandemic and education. So very fortunately today we have an expert here, Chris Hennessey. Chris is a member of Putnam's Business Advisory Group. He is part of the company's National Speaking Bureau since he joined in 2008. He also serves as a professor emeritus of law at Babson College and faculty director of Babson Global. Mr. Hennessey is a member of the American Bar Association, the Mass Bar Association, the American Institute of CPAs, and the Mass Society of Certified Public Accountants. He is a trustee of a private college and a former board member of the largest food service distributor in New England. As an instrument-rated private pilot, Mr. Hennessey is also a member of the Angel Flight New England. Previously, Mr. Hennessey served as the Dean of Undergraduate Program and Co-Dean of Executive Education at Babson College. Woo. Okay, so Chris, where'd you grow up?
Oh, thanks, Mark. I grew up, oh, by the way, I have my coffee. This is Dunkin' Donuts. I'm not a big Starbucks guy. So thank you for inviting me to coffee with your audience this morning. I grew up south of Boston in a town called Scituate, Massachusetts, right on the water. So I grew up sailing. I sailed competitively. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. I couldn't tell by that accent.
Yeah.
Then
Well,
again, I have an accent as well. So
well,
Brooklyn.
just before everyone joined, we were talking about Red Sox and Yankees, and I'm not really following the Red Sox too closely this summer. So,
Well, we're following the Yankees very closely.
yes, I understand.
Hopefully, there'll be a full season here. So, Boston undergrad, Suffolk U Law School from Mass. BU, Masters in Taxation. Education obviously is extremely important to you. Where'd you develop this thirst for education?
Well, I went through Babson undergraduate and majored in accounting, Mark, and I knew I wanted to go to law school. I had to go into the Navy. I went in the Naval Air for 10 years in the reserves, and it didn't interrupt with my education, but I went into public accounting. It's an interesting story, and I had an opportunity in 1977. I was in public accounting I was 27 years old, so I'd been around 3 or 4 years out of college, and Babson had a law position. They turned a gentleman down for tenure, so I'd never thought about teaching full-time. Went out and interviewed and got the job offer. It was less money than I was making in the city, but you didn't have to pay for parking. You didn't have to pay for lunch as much. And I took the job, and I've been there now 43 years. so I love teaching. I just love teaching, and it was an interesting transition in my career. And then, of course, you do a lot of consulting, which is how most business college professors make money. And I've done a lot of consulting over the years, both in the legal area and also, as you mentioned, with Putnam Investments.
Okay, well, you'll be teaching us today. Just curious, what was your first job out of high school? Or even in high school?
Yeah, high school, I worked for my dad. My dad had a chain of retail stores, liquor stores at the time. And I worked with him quite a bit during the summer and so forth. And earlier on, when I was a little bit younger, before that, I taught sailing for 3 summers. That's a great job, by the way. It's my job to teach sailing. And that was a nice, high school job. And then when I went back in school, I would work for my dad.
Excellent. Obviously, teaching was something important even back in high school.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Can you describe the different teaching models that colleges might use this fall?
Yeah, so if we back up a step, what's obviously happened when the COVID-19 hit kind of last March, a lot of these schools, most of them just shut down and they sent everyone home. And then they tried to pick up online. And that was pretty difficult for a lot of faculty because some of them had never had that experience before. So as we look towards the fall, and actually it's interesting, yesterday in the local papers here, the Boston Globe had an article, Colleges Reversing Course on Reopening. But there are, and I'll mention a few things from the article in a minute, but there are three different possible avenues. One would be all online. So the college that I'm on the board of is a small 4-year school, and we're going to be all online, meaning the students stay at home, they take the courses online, faculty do that from their homes. Why? Because we simply don't have the physical space to distance students in the classroom. We can't do it. So we made a decision. I think it's a good decision to go online. Second model is what I call hybrid. So Babson College, which is 2,000 undergraduates, 2,000 MBA students, when you look at MBA, full-time, part-time, so forth. And they're going to bring everyone back on campus, but they have more space, but it'll be hybrid, meaning that, let's use an example. Let's say I have a class of 40 students and I'm teaching, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So on Monday, 20 students are in the dorm online. I'm on camera in the classroom, and 20 students are in the classroom. And they're going to everyone have a mask on. Everyone will have a headset. And then the next day or Wednesday of that week, those 20 students that were in the dorm, it'll flip. They'll be in the classroom. That's a kind of a hybrid model. And there are a lot of schools that will use some sort of a hybrid model. And the third model, which I haven't seen anyone that they're actually going to do it this way, everyone's in the classroom. And the simple reason is that there's not enough space just to distance students 6 feet and get everyone in the classroom. There may be some schools that are doing that, but I'm not aware of that. So, you look at this article and, it was mentioning obviously Boston area, and, only Berkeley School of Music has announced plans to change course and offer classes exclusively online. And they were going to do hybrid. Now they're going to be online. If you look at Harvard, they're going to bring back about 40% of undergraduates to campus, including most first-year students. So 40%. And then it goes on. If you go back to Berkeley, for example, the college is planning to spend $8 to $10 million on testing and safety equipment. And that's one of the issues, Mark. So when you bring the students back, for example, at Babson, they're going to test these. Well, first of all, there's a whole protocol these kids have to go through before they can come back. We can talk about that later. But they have to be tested twice a week. And each test is anywhere from $25 to $35. So imagine having, let's say you've got 2,000 students and you've got to spend $50 a week times 2,000 for the entire semester in testing. So the common question will be, well, can't you pass that cost on to the students? Probably not, because a lot of times the financial aid had already been given out. You'd have to repackage their entire financial aid. So that's a cost a lot of schools are going to have to absorb. But anyway, to answer your question, those are the three models that are out there. I think a lot of schools are going to be hybrid.
Okay, I got so many questions running around in my brain. So let me start with the kids. So I'm a kid. I'm going to school. I'm going to Babson. I'm on some days. I'm off some days. I'm doing what we're doing here some days.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be tested twice a week, right? I'm guessing everyone goes to a facility. There's got to be enough facilities available because there's a lineup of 2,000 kids that have to take.
Yeah.
But okay, who's going to know whether I take the test or not? Who's going to be policing that?
Yeah.
Let's say I just say, I'm 18, I'm 19, I'm 20. I mean, I care where my next beer is. I don't care where, getting a test. So now I go into the classroom.
Yep.
I haven't been tested, but other people have been tested. How do they police something?
Yeah. So this is one of the fears I have, they will track this with computer technology. And even more basic is each student every day has to take their temperature in the morning, go into the computer and enter that in their records, which presumably will go to the health center. Now, this is self-certification, right? So how many students are going to be honest and say my temperature is fine and not honest? So that's a big issue in terms of my thinking. And then
You have
if
to also make sure that the kids have wherewithal to take their temperature.
exactly, that's exactly right. And then there's going to be a protocol if they haven't followed through, they overslept, they didn't get the testing done, they didn't submit the temperature, that they're not allowed in the classroom. So how is that all going to be enforced? Now, here's another interesting question. So if someone does come down with COVID-19, they're going to have to be isolated. And if we unfortunately got enough cases, there won't be enough room to isolate everyone. My biggest fear is around October and November, we get another spike in not only Babson, but any college then has to shut down and send the kids home. That's going to be an absolute disaster. And then there are interesting questions. This is kind of an offshoot of your point about what happens in the classroom. So yeah, everyone has to wear a mask. What if a kid says, I'm not going to wear the mask? Then what do you do as a faculty member? Well, there's a protocol, and you're probably going to have to call security. And I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen on a widespread basis, but it could happen. And then you've got the dormitories where there's not a lot of policing going on inside the dormitories, and who knows what they're doing in terms of social distancing inside the dorms.
So in the dorms, I'm gathering that they have roommates, right?
We have a lot of singles. I think the roommates would not be allowed unless it was the same family. So it's going to have to be single rooms. The big issue is not necessarily that, at least at Babson. The big issue is shared bathrooms. And you can't have two kids in the bathroom at the same time and so forth. But again, there's not enough physical employee force to monitor all of that. So there's an onboarding process for all students. They have to go through an onboarding process before they get back to campus online, and they have to quarantine for 2 weeks, as you know, very well know, unless you're from a low risk state like Massachusetts. When you come into Massachusetts, you have to have quarantined for 2 weeks, and so that has to happen and before they get here, and then they have to be tested immediately when they get here. And so there's this whole list of things they have to do before they can actually even come back to Babson. And if their parents are moving them in, their parents have to certify that they haven't been impacted by COVID-19 and so forth to even go on campus physically. And then the faculty have to go through a similar process.
So if a child gets COVID, I guess they can be isolated in their dorm room, or are they going to be extracted somewhere else? So,
I think the plan would be to extract them someplace else. We do have a health center, but it's not a large health center, and eventually maybe you'd want to send them home, but that might not be possible depending on where they live. We have another issue which is interesting. Probably 35% of our students are international from all over the world. We have a heavy contingent from Latinos from South America. We have a heavy contingent of Europeans, Asians, and a lot of them are not going to come back because they may have visa issues, but they're just not going to come back. They're going to be all online, whether they're undergraduates or MBAs. And then, of course, you're going to have the students that are there. Now, some of the freshman students, they can opt to do this. They can opt into another module, if you will, or another stream, and be all online, although from the dormitory.
Let me switch gears a little bit and just talk about financial.
Yeah.
What are some of the financial implications of the students returning to college?
Yeah.
Or just staying home, room and board, whatever, how does that going to work?
Yeah. So the biggest financial implication to the colleges is loss of room and board. So they are paying, tuition, they're paying room, housing fee, and food. So if you go online and they stay home, you're losing the room and board. And for a place like Babson, I'm not sure the exact number, it's probably $1 million a week or something like that they'd lose. So the related question then becomes, okay, if they stay home online, Yeah, the institutions are not going to need as much support. They're not going to need cafeteria people, not as many maintenance people, gyms closed, student services, security. So people will be furloughed or laid off, and that'll involve some savings for the institution. One of the issues that then comes up is what about the online tuition amount? Well, in some cases, it's going to be exactly the same as if they were there. And parents have different thoughts about that. But the immediate implication is the loss of room and board. Now to back up again a step, uh, just so I'm clear, a lot of schools did get PPP funded, payroll protection program funded, because they had less than 500 employees. Babson did not because they have more than 500 employees. The school I'm on the board of did, and there may be a second round of this coming, even if you've gotten it before. Congress is mulling that around right now.
So let's just talk a little bit about the school that you're on the board with.
Sure. Yeah.
So they got PPP, and also they're doing everything online.
Correct.
So if I'm a parent of a student and they're doing everything remotely, I don't want to pay the same
Yeah.
tuition that I paid last year.
Yep.
I'd be angry. Is
Yep.
that what's happening?
Well, I get a couple comments. The at least the school I'm on the board of course, I'm familiar with this, and I'm not going to name the school because this is some confidential information. But in any event, both very mixed. Some parents were actually happy with the decision because they were worried about sending their kids back. They're worried about safety, right? They didn't want to send their kids back. We've had a few, but I'd say it's a minority that have made this argument about tuition. Now, I think the tuition reduction argument depends a lot on the course of study. And let me give you some examples. If I'm sending a kid to Berkeley School of Music or an art school, that's extremely specialized, or a dance school, extremely specialized. A lot of in-person contact, I think, is necessary to be effective. And then I think I have a pretty good argument, okay, I should get a tuition reduction. On the other hand, if the student is in the university or college setting and taking general education courses or taking courses online that are more adaptable to online teaching, I'm not as convinced, because the schools aren't necessarily going to save a lot of money. Now, if you research this, it's very interesting. You've got schools like Arizona State, which is thousands and thousands of students online. You have University of Central Florida, you have San Jose, but they're doing this in volume, so they're able to reduce the tuitions. So I think most of the schools are not necessarily going to reduce the tuition. They may throw something into the mix, Mark. They may say, okay, if you come back in the spring, we're hoping you'll be able to come back on campus. We'll give you a couple of free courses or something like that.
If students are staying at home and doing things through Zoom or Webex or whatever they're doing it through, and doing online learning, what aspects? What are they missing out?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the things I've done a lot of online teaching. I have an MBA course I teach, which is, it's actually half online and it's half in person. Of course, this time around we couldn't be in person, but that's normally the way it's set up. And I think if you just think about the undergraduate experience for a couple of minutes, they're missing the socialization. They're missing the campus activities. A place like Babson is known for a lot of faculty-student contact, where you can get to know faculty pretty well outside of the classroom. That's not going to happen as much. Yeah, you could do a Zoom thing with a faculty member. So they're missing all of those things in terms of the overall cultural sort of social experience of being there. In terms of the learning in the classroom, I always maintain a lot of that depends on what are you willing to put into the learning. If you're going to be at home online, are you doing the reading? Are you doing the assignments? And a lot of the online courses are taught both synchronous and asynchronous. So synchronous would be you'd see me live, you'd see my slides, and I'm talking to my slides, and I'm trying to get students to participate. Asynchronous would be I've taped something that you have to look at during the week. It's the other hand, the students will argue, and I think this is where there is a difference. In the classroom, I get eye contact, if I've got 30 kids, I can see if one of the kids is kind of out of it, and maybe I call on them. You really can't do that online. And I think that experience will be lacking. But I would argue that a lot of courses, like an accounting course or finance course, the business curriculum can be taught online. I think it's harder to do case studies, breakout groups, although they can be done online. And I think it's harder to do courses that are like writing or poetry, that type of thing on an online basis, Mark.
Yeah, I would think writing would be a little bit easier because you're kind of
Yeah, maybe.
right writing.
Yeah, maybe.
Uh, I'm just wondering what's your favorite? Do you like Zoom or WebEx? What?
Oh, good. Yeah, good question. So I've done both. Babson's platform is Webex. And so when I do my online teaching there, it's all through a WebEx. And then we have something called Canvas where you set your course up. And then I do a lot of Zoom because of my consulting, like this morning and so forth. And, here's the difference. Zoom is probably easier, and Zoom got ahead of the curve on team meetings. So let me give you an example. So I just got through teaching this MBA course. I had 37 students. And one Saturday, I had to go all day, 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon online. You give them a coffee break, you give them lunch. So to break up the day in the afternoon, I split them into groups. Now, how did I do that? Well, each team was about 6 people, had a group leader, student. And the student has a personal room, like a Zoom personal room, so you can go into the personal room. So at a certain time, I had the instructions. The students all went into that group leader's personal room. They worked an hour virtually, put together a slide deck, and then came back into my personal room and presented. A little cumbersome. Zoom makes it easier to do that than WebEx. Now, WebEx does now have an application for team meetings. And you can imagine in the corporate world how many team meetings there'd be. So those are kind of the trade-offs that I've seen. I think I have had no problems with bandwidth. So here's another issue that's interesting. So you got faculty, you got 250, 300 faculty at Babson. And let's assume they're all online. They're not going to be, but they're all online at home. So do they have a dedicated space? How's their bandwidth? How's their Wi-Fi? What if the Wi-Fi goes out during a class? And a lot of them, the only experience they've ever had with this is a snow day. So, the winters in Boston, winters in New York, right? They get a snow day and they say, all right, I got to teach online today. I don't do much of that, but I'll do a WebEx for an hour or whatever it is. So those are kind of some of the differences I've noticed between Zoom and WebEx.
I'm just going to remind everybody that's listening, if you want to ask a question to Chris, please email me at mkravietz, Kravietz, at alignwealth.com. Align is ALINE, wealth.com. So if you have a question for Chris while we go through this, please feel free to ask a question. What's the future like? What's going to happen? Is this transformative? Have we started a new beginning? Is this the way of the world? Is it online? Do people not want to go back to colleges anymore? Do they not want to, meet freshman year and gain the freshman 15 by doing whatever, eating and drinking and whatever?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think there's a lot of answers in that question or thoughts, Mark. First of all, we're not sure what will happen in the spring. And a lot of these schools may say, okay, well, there's a vaccine. I think Moderna has a vaccine. They just got to test it. So like the college I'm on the board of, we're hoping to bring the students back in the spring. And hopefully that'll happen and parents will be comfortable with that safety-wise and so forth. And secondly, yes, this is kind of disruptive technology in the sense of going all online. But I think there is a lot with the college experience. And I think you get a lot out of that. You take a place like Babson where you're working with other students, many of whom are international. You're working in teams, you're learning about different cultures. And I think there would be a lot lacking if you went through a 4-year program totally online. Having said that, I also feel that people working in the workforce and maybe early mid-career, and they want to get an MBA and they can do it all online and still work, there's some merit to that. And if you actually research it, I researched this a little bit. The schools that can reduce costs have a large population. They have 20, 30, 40,000 students online. But a place like Babson, where class size might be 30, it's not going to work as well. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of, okay, well, we went online, it worked, so we're going to stay online, because you got a physical plant. It's expensive. You've got dormitory rooms, you got a library, you got a gym, you got football fields, baseball fields. What's going to happen to all that stuff?
So I want you to feel at home here.
Oh, that's nice.
So
Yeah.
if you can take a look here,
Babson.
make you feel, that's quite a footprint. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's 450 acres.
Wow.
So I could never see, Mark, in the case of like a Babson, where, because we're not going to do this anywhere right now, we just go totally online. I can see that happening maybe to some schools, but and I had a theory once that someday, and this was 10 years ago, I began to think about this when I was an administrator at Babson, the costs of tuition. I mean, the parents on this call today, they know these tuition costs, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And maybe I said to myself, maybe a college will do a stripped down version. So they won't have a library, they won't have a gym, and they'll try to save costs. Hasn't happened. And my argument is, I mean, it's an economic argument. So think about this. Babson College admits 500 freshman students. They probably get 7,000 applications. So they're turning down 6,500 potential customers. So it's simple supply demand, right? I mean, the demand is much higher than the supply. So why do you suppose colleges can continue to increase tuition the way they do?
Do you think that will continue that high? Because you think, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not, but there's a lot of demand for good quality colleges and institutions. And of course, we just saw this scandal, right, where this criminal scandal and so forth. So you can see what parents are willing to pay to get their kids into a place like a Stanford and so forth, or even a Babson for that matter. So I think we will go back eventually. It's an interesting argument in the workplace, right? So we got too many office buildings now in New York City and Manhattan, or too many office buildings in Boston. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but I think people want to go to work. They want the socialization, right, of going to work. Somebody to talk to, right?
Yeah. Discuss the Yankees. I have a couple of
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions
Sure.
here. Do you know of any psychologists studying the effects of the different age groups? What's happening with the elementary school kids, the middle school
Yeah.
kids, high school kids, as well as adults?
Yeah. So interesting. I think it was yesterday. I was telling my wife this. Bill Gates came out and said kids should go back to public schools. And there are a number of studies looking at the impact of, let's say, grade school, high school kids not going back in terms of psychology, more maybe drug use, suicides, and all that stuff, that will argue, okay, yeah, there's going to be some COVID that's going to be brought home, but when you weigh that against the other factors, it makes more sense to go back. Now, the teachers are arguing that it's just not going to be safe. You're going to put us in harm's way. And I think a lot of it depends on where are you in the United States. Are you in a low risk area, or are you in a Los Angeles or a Miami? So there are studies. I'm not familiar. I couldn't cite any, but there has been studies done now on that question.
Okay, we have another question. Sorry,
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question here. So there's a concern for all the students' loss of personal education from the socialization, kind of similar to what we were talking about, to the connection and the networking and those opportunities lost. And they'd like to know what's the best way of networking relationships for internships, and then when they graduate, how one day they can use that networking. So
Sure. Yeah, I get that question a lot, and there are a couple of avenues. One avenue is use the alumni network. So, for example, Babson has a very large alumni network. So I'll tell any student of mine, okay, you're looking for a job in a certain area, go into the alumni database and see who's out there that could help you. Secondly is obviously LinkedIn. So even kids in high school start to think about getting on LinkedIn because could help them get into college, right? I think LinkedIn is another source. And thirdly, it's an interesting question from the aspect of, well, if you're online, you don't get to know your faculty as well, and maybe not even know other students as well who are going to become your colleagues later on in life. And I think that's why it's important to try to get back on campuses as soon as we can, so that you can do those things in the future.
Okay. Describe what's now going on in Congress with pending legislation.
Yeah, sure. All right, so there's a number of things that have happened. We had the CARES Act, which was in March, and now we're looking at another relief program, and really it's been described as the HEALS Act, HEALS, versus the HEROES Act. HEALS Act is the Republican version, the HEROES Act is the Democratic version. And I think what people would be interested in is maybe 3 or 4 things without going through all the details here. One is the continuation of unemployment. So the $600 a week, which is the pandemic unemployment, just ran out July 31. Right. And the Democrats would like that extended through the end of the year. The Republicans are saying, no, we got to cap that. They want to provide $200 a week through September and then cap it and bring it down, because the studies are indicating 60+% of people are staying at home on unemployment, making more money than if they went back to work. So that's in the win. Second thing, which I think is really important, even to the discussion we just had about colleges, is liability protection. And this is something that the Republicans are arguing. There ought to be liability protection for colleges, hospitals, businesses, that when they bring employees back, they have guests on the premises, they're not going to be liable if someone gets COVID-19. And there will be standards. I mean, basically, the standards would be that a plaintiff would have to show the business or the college was grossly negligent. And I think there will be some sort of liability protection, and that'll make places like Babson feel better about bringing people back. Third thing is the Paycheck Protection Program. So any business owners out there, we've gone through, I think now 3 rounds of that, and apparently in those legislation, there's some bipartisan support. I'm just looking at my notes here for another round. Even though you may have gotten the loan already, you could get another loan if you had less than, I think it's 350 employees, and there'll be a test. Your revenue has gone down by 50% measured against some previous period. So that's going to be it's actually 300 employees, 300 workers. That's going to be kind of interesting. And then beyond that, there's some other miscellaneous stuff that's in here. But the big one that people should be familiar with, anyone that got a check, if you were single, for $1,200 or married for $2,400 and had a child $500, that's going to come back again. Same thing. You're just going to get another check. So that they're wrestling with now. Apparently some progress was made over the weekend on this, but I do expect some legislation relatively soon on mainly those issues.
And I've heard anywhere from $1 trillion to $2 trillion.
Yeah. I think it's somewhere in between, maybe 1.4, 1.5. That's exactly right. So more money that the more printing presses, right? And it's interesting because Joe Biden's talking about raising taxes and so forth, but you know what? If Trump's reelected, he's going to have to raise revenue somehow. 49% of all revenue of the federal government comes from individual income taxes, about 35% from payroll taxes, and the rest from 7-8% from corporations and estate and gift and so forth. So individual taxes in some format are going to have to go up. And that raises all sorts of great planning things that you can start to do.
Right. Maybe not initially.
Right.
Might take a little time. We got a tough economy, so at some point, I do agree that would happen. Anything else in the HEAL/HEROES Act that you want to mention? at all?
Well, I just a comment, I guess, more in my way of thinking. I think the payroll protection program, although it had its quirks in the beginning, but I think it's actually worked out pretty well. And the biggest problem was a lot of restaurants was saying early on, like in April, hey, we're getting a loan that's forgivable to hire people back, but we can't hire them back because our restaurant's not open yet; it's closed. So they changed it. They said, okay, well, we're going to change the period of time from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. And now you only have to spend 60% on payroll, not 75% on payroll. So I think that program worked out really well. I think there's some pretty good arguments that the $1,200 to $2,400 that folks are getting, remember that's below certain income levels, that money's going into the economy. They're going on Amazon and buying stuff. They're going shopping to the food stores. So that's help to support the economy. I also think that down the road we're going to see these bankruptcies every day in the papers. There was one of Lord and Taylor's
Lord
was
Taylor.
today. So those waves of bankruptcies are yet to come. The airlines and so forth, and of course they'll reorganize. So I think we had to throw money at this thing in relief. I mean, this was not a liquidity crisis like we went through before. This was a medical virus crisis.
Right. Any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
Well,
Anything else?
one thing that's interesting to me as a professor is what's the difference? What do I find that's easier to do in the classroom than online? And the big thing, and no one would ever think about this, but it's interesting. So if you're in the classroom, you have a whiteboard. When I first started, Mark, was a chalkboard. Those are gone. It's an actual whiteboard, and you use one of these pens that has a felt tip, and you can move around and you can put stuff on that whiteboard. You got the students out there, and you get engaged in a conversation, and so forth. Now, when you're online, you really can't do that. I mean, there are some ways you can use a stylus and on a iPad. So it's much more cumbersome online. And then you got another issue, which is interesting. So say I've got some students, it's the hybrid model, and I've got some students, in the classroom, and then there's some in the dorm who are viewing this on their iPad or on their computer. Well, the room is now all wired up with mics and a camera. And I like to move around in the classroom. I just don't sit there. I move around. So the camera is supposed to track me. Always doesn't work that perfectly. And just imagine places like Babson having to wire up and get cameras in all these classrooms that were never in there before. So there are just some things that are challenging depending on, from a faculty viewpoint, teaching viewpoint, depending on your style and so forth.
And what happens if someone has a question and they're home?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, well, that's been a little cumbersome. I've kind of figured it out. On Webex, I'm not sure about Zoom. I think it's similar on Zoom. You can actually raise your hand. So I can see all the students and they have their hand raised, and then I click them on. Another thing you can do, and this is what I tend to do, is the chat box. So if you leave the chat box open and the student is posting a question, you can see it and it's permanent. And then I can go back to that student. Here's the problem I've had. Problem I've had is when I put my slides up on my computer screen, it takes the whole screen. So I can't see the chat box as well. These are kind of crazy stuff, but you're trying to work through this because you want to be more effective in your teaching. I'll tell everyone something else that's kind of interesting. I've been teaching, 43 years, and probably from the beginning, you always get in a class a core group of students, maybe 8 to 10 that participate. They make comments, they ask questions. The rest are pretty silent unless you call them. That's just as true online as it is in the classroom. So the real challenge online is, how do I get more students engaged online? And occasionally I'll just say, hey, Tom, how you doing? I see you out there. Got any questions? And you know what, Mark? The other thing is they got to turn their cameras on. You can't see them at all if they don't have the cameras on. So
Are they required to do that, or?
I require it, yeah, unless, well, in my case with MBAs, they're traveling and they're in an airport. But the undergrads, absolutely, they're in their dorm. They could turn their camera on. They got to turn their camera on. Otherwise, I can't see them. The other students can't see them either.
And I'm just, as we were talking, I'm just wondering from age group standpoint, kids that are kind of in the lower school, kids in middle school, kids in high school, kids that are in college.
Yeah.
Who do you think is being affected the most with this? They're all being affected, but
Yeah.
I got to believe there's some age group that is
Yeah.
really being affected so much worse.
I think there's maybe two categories. I think the younger kids, I mean, you take a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, how can they sit there and looking at an iPad without either a tutor with them or a parent with them, helping them through the learning? So I think there's a big impact there. And of course, then the parents are saying, well, I got to go back to work. And,
Right.
and you take poverty areas of the country, that may be the kids going to school, maybe the only meal they get. There may be abuse at home. So I think that's a big impact. I also think now you go to the high school level, and yeah, they should be able to learn online, but are they really tuning in? There was some study done, I think it was in Los Angeles, that indicated 60% of all the high school students weren't even tuning into their classes online. So I think those are the two categories that would stand out to me.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Wow, this was really eye-opening. I thank you, Chris, so much for this information. For anybody that has any other questions, email me. Chris, would it be okay if
Sure.
people
Yeah,
email me?
absolutely.
Okay, so if you have any other questions about this topic, about the HEAL/Heroes Act, please email me, mkravietz at alignwealth.com. I'll forward it over to Chris, and we'll get that answered. So thank you so much again, Chris. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Coffee with Kravietz. We will be back same bad time, same bad station next week at 10 o'clock Tuesday. So thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.